冇啊
It doesn't add up.
因為唔合理啦。
But from God's perspective, it does.
但係咧，從神嘅角度啦，從神嘅眼光咧，就可以去發生。
Some have expressed it saying that 9/10, when we give the 1/10 to God, goes farther than 10/10 would otherwise.
講多次。
If we tithe our 1%, if we tithe 10%, then God will somehow allow us to do more with the 90% than if we had the full 100% to begin with.
如果咧我哋願意將自己嘅收入嘅1/10咧去俾上帝啦，只係用剩翻落嚟嗰9份啦，咁其實咧我哋能夠做到嘅，或者我哋神可以藉住呢9份賜俾我哋嘅嘢咧，係多過我哋咧全部擁有嗰10份嘅喎。
Based on God's perspective, if we see Him leading in a certain way, if we feel that God has moved us to be able to give, and yet we do not have, but we make that commitment trusting in Him, God provides. He's done it many, many, many times and in many, many different ways that we cannot begin to expect how He will do that.
當我哋咧願意去接受神嘅引領啦，接受神嘅感動啦，去做超越我哋嘅能力能夠付出嘅，而我哋又真係咁樣去做喎，我哋咁樣去樂意喎，神咧就會供應，神咧可以喺好多我哋完全想像唔到嘅渠道啊或者情況之下咧，佢都可以咁樣去祝福我哋嘅。
Look at verse 9, 2 Corinthians 8:9.
睇下哥林多後書8章9節。
For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though He was rich, yet for your sakes, He became poor, so that you through His poverty might become rich.
你們知道我們主耶穌基督的恩典，他本來富足，卻為你們成了貧窮，叫你們因他的貧窮可以成為富足。
It doesn't add up in a worldly way.
呢度所講嘅嘢咧，用世人嘅眼光咧係唔合理嘅。
But on the basis of faith, on a basis of trust in the Lord, and willingness to commit to the way that He is leading, that's what it is. That's the reality.
但係如果用信心啦，如果用委身啦嚟做一個根基，就可以做到啦。
Paul discovered that.
保羅咧知道或者明白呢一樣嘢。
Flip back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6.
咁佢喺哥林多後書第6章咧所講。
Okay, chapter 6, verse 10.
哥林多後書6章10節講。
Sorrowful, yet always rejoicing.
似乎憂愁，卻是常常快樂的。
Poor, yet making many rich.
似乎貧窮，卻是叫許多人富足的。
Having nothing, yet possessing everything.
似乎一無所有，卻是樣樣都有的。
People don't operate that way in a worldly level.
世人咧唔係咁樣噶嘛，係咪？
But God is saying to us that on the spiritual level, in our weakness, we can be strong beyond measure.
上帝咧都俾我哋知道咧，喺屬靈當中咧，當我哋軟弱嘅時候，我哋軟弱嘅時候就係剛強嘅時候。
The Smyrna church, a poor yet rich church.
士每拿教會係點樣啊？係一個貧窮卻係富足嘅教會。
The value system, the world view that this church has, and that God is challenging them with, is what makes the difference in their lives.
因為佢哋係貧窮嘅，但係佢哋係用神嘅準則啦去睇事物啦，同埋佢哋亦都願意去遵從呢一個準則，所以咧佢哋就係富足嘅。
Now let's go on to look at a second characteristic of the church in Smyrna.
第二樣咧，我哋睇士每拿教會嘅基督徒嘅特質咧係啲乜嘢咧？
As we continue to look at verse 9, we see that it is a church that faced false and hurtful accusations that were made against them.
喺第9節咧，我哋都見到呢個教會咧係俾一啲自稱嘅猶太人就講一啲毀謗嘅説話。
Jesus says, I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan.
呢度咧，耶穌咧就話我係知道咧有呢啲事發生啦，佢哋唔係猶太人，乃是撒但一會嘅人。
Verbal and hurtful, harmful words were being made by people against those who claim to be Christians.
有啲人咧，佢就即係當時咧，有啲人咧咁佢自稱為基督徒啦，但係咧佢哋嘅言語咧就係去毀謗咧呢個教會嘅，去傷害佢哋嘅。
Jesus experienced that, did he not?
耶穌當然佢經歷過呢一樣嘢。
Was that not something that he had to face and endure many times in his 3 years of ministry?
喺佢3年傳道嘅生涯裏邊咧，時常都會面對，時常都會經歷呢啲嘢。
Were not false and slanderous charges made against him when they sought reason to crucify him?
當咧佢哋要揾原因去釘耶穌上十字架嘅時候，佢哋都講咗好多毀謗或者作咗好多嘅説話係假嘅。
Now, notice the source of those accusations.
呢啲指控咧係喺邊度嚟㗎？
Those who were their fellow Jews.
就係咧同佢哋一齊嘅，或者都係猶太人嚟嘅。
Those who are the people of God.
係神嘅子民喎。
Those through whom God had worked all the way through Old Testament times.
由舊約聖經開始，神咧一路都係去看顧，或者一路都係帶領住呢一啲人喎。
Those through whom Jesus had come into this world.
耶穌亦都係喺猶太人嗰度即係嚟到呢個世界啦。
But Jesus says they are a synagogue of Satan.
但係耶穌咧呢度就話佢哋係撒但一會嘅人。
It's the spiritual identity that is being talked about of those Jewish accusers.
呢度所講嘅係一個屬靈嘅身份。
It's not the worldly perspective of their identity, it is the spiritual perspective.
唔係世人點樣去睇佢哋，或者唔係世人點樣去理解佢哋嘅社會地位喎，而係咧神咧用佢嘅眼光，佢屬靈嘅眼光去睇。
They were a synagogue of Satan.
係撒但一會嘅人。
Who did the synagogue belong to in their days and their time?
喺當時咧因為呢個如果英文嘅話就係會堂啦，咁樣會堂應該係屬於乜嘢㗎？
This was a place for worship of God.
會堂咧係敬拜神嘅地方嚟㗎嘛。
But it had become a place for worship of Satan.
但係咧變成咧敬拜撒但嘅地方。
Satan is always going to take the things of God and counterfeit them to deceive people.
撒但咧佢永遠都係有一個手法，就係將屬於神嘅一啲嘢，就將佢變成假嘅嚟去其他人。
We saw that last week in relationship to the Ephesian church.
上個星期咧，我哋睇以弗所教會啦，我哋就見到即係有同樣嘅事情發生。
How was that?
係點樣發生啊？
At Ephesus, there were people who claimed to be apostles of Jesus Christ, but they were false apostles.
喺以弗所教會佢哋見到一啲自稱為使徒卻不是使徒嘅人啊。
Satan's true nature as the deceiver is exposed by the word of Jesus Christ to both the Ephesian and the Smyrna churches.
撒但佢係欺騙人嘅，咁用耶穌基督嘅話語就可以驗證到佢係人嘅。咁無論係對以弗所嘅教會啊，對士每拿嘅教會亦都一樣。
Now the third characteristic of the Smyrna church was that they would suffer physically but that was a part of a spiritual refining process in their lives.
第三個特點咧，就係、關乎士每拿教會嘅，就係佢哋都係受到一啲肉體上邊嘅迫害啦。但係同時間咧，藉住呢啲肉體嘅迫害咧，佢哋嘅信仰咧，佢哋嘅屬靈生命咧，又得以鍛鍊喎，得以成長喎。
Jesus says, I know your afflictions, I know your suffering, I know your distress.
耶穌呢度咧就講話，我知道你嘅患難啊，我知道你嘅受苦。
I know the anguish and the hurt that you experience because of these things.
耶穌好清楚咧，佢哋因為佢哋信仰啦，對神嘅信心啦，而所經歷嘅一切嘅苦難。
In verse 10, he says, do not be afraid of what you're about to suffer.
第10節講到話你。啟示錄第2章第10節講到話，你將要受的苦，你不用怕。
I tell you, the devil is going to put some of you in prison to test you.
魔鬼要把你們中間幾個人下在監裏，叫你們被試煉。
And you will suffer persecution for 10 days.
你們必受患難10日，你們要治死啊！你們必受患難10日。
Okay, in the Old Testament, prophets, a day often stood for a year. One day represented 1 year. Many times in the Old Testament.
喺舊約聖經裏邊咧，好多時候佢形容講一日咧，其實就係講緊1年嘅。
For instance, the spies that went into the Promised Land to search out the land were there for 40 days.
譬如就講到係佢哋去佢哋應許之地。即係佢哋派啲探子啦，去應許之地嗰度視察嗰個地方啦，就去咗40日啦。
But because 10 of those came back with an evil report about the land, God punished them by making them wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
咁佢哋係喺嗰笪地方嗰度睇咗40日啦，然後咧嗰10個探子翻到嚟，佢哋唔夠信心啦，就喺度講，即係啦。咁神咧就去懲罰佢哋，讓以色列人咧就喺曠野嗰度咧就要留40年啦。
Now I cannot tell you that the 10 days means 10 years here. I don't know.
嗱呢一度啟示錄所講嘅患難10日係咪講緊10年咧？我哋唔肯定。
During the time of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, there was a persecution, 10 persecutions that lasted for 10 years.
我哋睇翻羅馬嘅歷史啦，咁我哋見到當時咧對基督徒或者對基督教會咧就有10個嘅逼迫嘅事件嘅，咁係嗰個期間咧係10年嘅。
But that was from the year 303 to 313, so a long time, about 200 years after this.
不過咧，呢一啲咁樣大規模嘅逼迫咧，就係喺啟示錄所寫之後嘅200年之後先發生嘅。
But 2 things that we want you to notice here.
但係有2樣嘢咧，想關於喺呢一度嘅經文咧，想大家留意嘅。
Physical suffering came upon them in order to test them, in order to let them grow strong in their commitment and their faithfulness to God.
呢度講到咧，佢哋所受嘅苦係啲乜嘢嚟㗎？係一啲試煉嚟喎，係令到佢哋對上帝更加堅定嘅個信心。
And so he says, be faithful even to the point of death.
所以咧喺呢度，耶穌就叫佢哋要至死忠心。
He also says the time of suffering will be limited.
亦都俾佢哋知道，但係咧同時間咧俾佢哋知道，你哋受嘅苦難咧係有限期嘅，係會完結嘅。
It will not last forever.
唔會永遠嘅。
God is still in control.
神咧係仍然係掌管一切嘅。